Good evening and welcome to Seven Stories Up, where tonight, author and pioneering klezmer performer Walter Zev Feldman will discuss his book From the Bronx to the Bosphorus, Klezmer and Other Displaced Musics of New York. Dr. Feldman is joined in conversation by the professor of Near Eastern Studies, András Hámori. We are delighted to welcome you at Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library, the flagship branch of the New York Public Library. My name is Ali Weitzman, and I'm a librarian in this building, World Languages Collections, and I will be your host this evening. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I would like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making this evening's program possible. I would also like to remind everyone that if you don't already have a library card, it is easy to get one by visiting any information desk in our building or by speaking with one of my colleagues outside of this room after the program. Additionally, I would like to encourage you to visit the New York Public Library's website and take a look at other upcoming Seven Stories Up programs. We have an excellent lineup coming up, and of course, we would love to have you join us in this space again. A little bit information about tonight's speakers. And I will start by introducing Dr. András Hámori. Dr. Hámori was Cleveland E. Dodge Professor of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton. He was born and raised in Budapest and began the study of Arabic and Persian languages at the University of Vienna in 1958. After moving to the United States, he received his A.B. and Ph.D. degrees from Princeton and Harvard. He taught at Princeton for over 40 years and especially enjoyed his courses on classical Arabic poetry and the Hebrew poetry of medieval Spain. His pioneering studies of classical Arabic literature are distinguished by thorough scholarship joined to perspective criticism. This studies show that classical Arabic poetry, which scholars have valued only for linguistic or historical data that they could mine from, is a complex literary tradition worthy of critics' attention and, when properly understood, a source of pleasure to its reader. At the present, Dr. Hámori reports that since his retirement, his principal occupations have been improving his Greek and struggling towards mediocrity at the cello. And to give further introduction, I would like to call Dr. Hámori to the podium. Dr. Hámori?
Zev is many things. He's a musicologist who has done fundamental work into different areas of music, namely Ottoman Turkish music and Jewish music. He is also a performer on the klezmer dulcimer, or cymbal, what we call cymbalum, although the tuning is different, and also on the Ottoman lute, the tambur. In addition, he is also a historian and teacher of Jewish dance. And I want to add here that this strikes me as a very pleasant undertaking, being a teacher of Jewish dance, because I saw a video clip of him teaching in Weimar, of all places. And so on this video clip, you see a gentleman, very vigorous, but obviously not in the very first bloom of youth, demonstrating dignified and grave dance steps, and then some more bouncy ones, you know, where you go like that. And then he is suddenly joined by what I think the American word has to be bevy, of willowy women. It seemed like a nice racket to me. Okay, his many publications include three very influential books. The two on Ottoman Turkish music are Music of the Ottoman Court, Makam, Composition, and the Early Ottoman Instrumental Repertoire, which has recently been republished in a revised edition by Brill. And this is a book that wherever the subject is taught, this book is taught. Another book titled From Rumi to the Whirling Dervishes, Music, Poetry, and Mysticism in the Ottoman Empire, published in 2022. He has also published an Ottoman poetry, but let's return to music. His book, Klezmer, Music, History, and Memory, was published by Oxford University Press in 2016, and this is the most scholarly study of klezmer music in existence. As we discuss scholarly publications, I want to mention a recording. In 1999, he produced and played on a record called Chavrisa. Chavrisa, Chavruta, if you like, has been reviewed it was reviewed at the time in glowing terms, and I will quote just two things. This is the first modern studio recording of the klezmer music of Europe. That would be pre-World War I Europe. And half of these compositions were recorded here for the first time. So it is a matter of scholarship, among other things. I mean, this music had to be recovered. Also a matter of playing. He also plays on this recording. He's a performer on the cymbal. Another review says the passion of Chavrisa shines through in impassioned playing that illuminates an otherwise underlit piece of the past. A very nice and correct remark. Finally, Zev is an authority on East European Jewish dance, which he has taught in Israel, Germany, Russia, Japan, the US, and Canada. And I would now invite him to come up here so that I can ask him other things. Neither of us have a watch, therefore every so often we'll have to click on this phone to see just how far along we are. So, I will point out that we've batted ideas back and forth about what the principal themes of this discussion should be, and there will be some visual and audio illustrations. So I'd like to start our conversation with a quote, because that makes life easy for me. This comes from what you call the invocation to your book, and it has, to me at least, a tincture of Hasidic parable about it, and it goes like this. Klezmer music stands across from us and apart from us. It's a little island just off the shore. On a clear day, you can make out trees and pathways, half-ruined houses from the days when it had been inhabited. Sometimes ghostly music wafts our way from the island, almost too faint to hear, but at times strident and piercing. I can recall the days over a decade ago when people still managed to come to our shore from there, but nowadays the traffic has ceased. The closest we come is to listen to the tales of those who met natives of the island many years ago. So what does this mean? How is one to read the atmosphere that you create here? How is one to read the metaphor? It will become clear in the course of the book that you were really spearheaded the revival of klezmer music in this country. But what I'm asking is there something, does the metaphor refer to something beyond that fact? Are there overtones of childhood, of ancestry, of...
Exactly,
Go.
there are. Okay. I wrote that about 25 years ago, and I have no idea why I wrote it, but I wrote this, and it's a longer, in the book you'll see a longer version of this invocation. And what I want to stress is that I'm, let's say, I grew up in an extremely ghettoized Jewish, Yiddish-speaking neighborhood. My father's family were almost entirely murdered during the Holocaust. And he came from with a Romanian passport for what's now called Moldova. And almost many people I knew in the neighborhood also had parents who had been in concentration camps. My best friend was born in a displaced persons camp in Germany from Poland. His parents had both survived concentration camps. So on a certain level, what I'm writing about this invocation is the difference between death and life. Death was the overwhelming reality that I grew up with. And the things, among the things, also I should say that my father, Meshulam Feldman, was my main entree into this music and dance that I will describe here. And he came before the Shoah. He came after the First World War to America. And I understood that to counteract this death that was all around us, he was a wonderful dancer. He was a religious Jew who davened in shul in the old style. He loved music, but of this kind of traditional music. And so for me, this image of the klezmer music was life. And it was a life that I inherited from my ancestors, so my father and his martyred parents in Romania. And in a sense, part of my life was trying to find this island that had disappeared, that was completely gone. And we have to understand there's the physical annihilation of our communities in Europe, for one thing. Then there was the strange oblivion into which this culture passed in America, for reasons that I still don't fully understand. But certainly when I was young, there was no way I could understand why it wasn't alive, why it wasn't being transmitted, but I knew there was something there. Okay, that's my answer.
Well, it's good that you stopped there because I'm going to ask that very question. There's another passage in your book that I find particularly charming. And this I'm not going to quote, but try to summarize. It's in 1975. You're in Paris. You're having a good time. You socialize. You wander around the boulevards, and suddenly, a memory comes to you. And whether this is because you're not mesmerized by the girls, or more likely, precisely because you're mesmerized by the girls, the memory of a breathtakingly sad melody comes into your head. Mm-hmm. And so it turns out that this is a melody that you know from a record that your friend Andy Statman found at a flea market. Mm-hmm. It's an old 78 RPM that was produced before the First World War in what was then Lemberg, what is now Lviv, what was then Austro-Hungarian and is now Ukrainian. And the label on the record reads Haneros Haluli, Hanerot Halalu for the less educated among us. And then I quote, you say, these are words that begin one of the prayers for Hanukkah, one of the gayest of Jewish festivals. It featured a single violin that performed a rubato melody utilizing a penitential synagogue mode. It was of breathtaking sadness. And you continue to say you loved and enjoyed the inventive and gay dance tunes that Dave Taras played on the clarinet, but you wanted to learn where this music came from. And so a summer's day's reverie under the plane trees plunged you into the exploration and ultimately the revival of authentic klezmer music. And
Can I try to answer that question? First, why don't we listen to Aneros Haluli for a minute? Audio folks? Thank you very much.
Lovely. So, well, thank you for playing that. It was very, very beautiful.
Can I say a word about it?
Sorry?
What's important to me about this was that I understood that in our culture, the Jewish culture in Europe, there was this inextricable mixture of, as I say, prayer, lamentation, and celebration. And these are my words, but this was what I understood, especially from my father and many of the older Jewish people from Eastern Europe. But in America, the lamentation side was being underplayed. America wasn't about lamentation. And so I knew that there was something strange for me. And whereas I was, let's say, in the first chapter, I have a bit of a dialogue to my father where I'm complaining, why can't he share this sadness, this burden that's in his heart, as a man who lost his family, as a man who emigrated, and also as a Jew. I mean, how can you let them feed us this nonsensical American popular Jewish music that I was hearing on every side? And I was naturally drawn, by that time, to communities that had a more serious music, which I had access to. First of all, the Greeks. Secondly, the Armenians. And part of this book describes how almost by sheer chance I was sort of invited into those two communities. I didn't have to knock on doors. I had older mentors who sort of took me in. And my father loved both Greek and Armenian music, traditional serious music. And at the same time that I was hearing, just by chance, that time we didn't have access to the pre-World War I Jewish klezmer recordings from Europe. No way. Nobody knew them. My friend Andy bumped into this one recording. Now, at the same time, I was studying with the great Armenian musician, András Arustamian, who was a kamancha player of a bowed instrument. And I'll say more about him toward the end. But at the very same time, I was studying with András and I was accompanying him in concerts. Let's play one of his pieces, Seretsi Yardaran, get a sense of his playing. Please. just a brief taste of his wonderful playing. I won't belabor the point, but there are many similarities on a deep level between these musics. And my father sensed this, by the way. Not that he ever heard Antranik, but other Armenian singing and music. And the role of lamentation is so central, both to Armenians, to Greeks, to Jews. I have a friend that I haven't seen for years who's a Greek cantor in Athens, a woman cantor. And she told me that she once had lived for a year in Germany, but she said she couldn't tolerate it because the Germans have no lamentation. She couldn't live in a country without lamentation. So it's important to understand. And for me, growing up in the English-speaking, in the U.S. and even in New York, this was a primary distinction. Those cultures that had this sense, I could relate to them. The culture that did not have it, I could not relate to.
And so are you saying that it's the post-World War II immigrant generation that lost?
Not the immigrant, the born, like my generation,
Okay,
that was born in America.
Fine.
Yeah.
That the, let's say, the authentic East European style klezmer music existed in the 20s still.
To a point, not exactly. Also, actually, Jim Leffler, the wonderful historian, wrote a master's thesis about the decline of the Jewish wedding in America, where in fact, even by the 1920s, the traditional wedding was no longer current, neither in the US nor in Canada. Now, klezmer music, a good half of it is meant for listening. It's sad, it's serious, and a real klezmer, the best klezmorim didn't even play dance music. They were only hired to play serious listening music, and the younger musicians played for dancing. Now, in America, this was impossible. This couldn't go on like that. So, again, it's thanks to, we'll get into scholarship a bit later, but I was able to discover notations of the old wedding music, Jewish wedding music, which had a very important, serious, sad component. Now, again, that was dying out already by 1940. And in fact, there's a wonderful Yiddish article written in Montreal by a writer named Rabinovich, who was the son of a klezmer, which is describing his father playing the serious wedding music to nobody in his own bedroom. No function. And the title of the article is called, the story is called, Unser heimischer Klezmer in Jazzland. Right? So this is something. Now, way ahead in 1979, Andy and I were able to produce Dave Taras's last recording, which was called Music for the Traditional Jewish Wedding. And he was very responsible. He was playing things he hadn't played for 50 years, where he was looking at old notations from his family and so forth that had no currency at American Jewish weddings. But since he cared for us and we asked him for it, he did this. So that's another reality where I say lack of transmission, right? Again, my book is not about lack of transmission, right? And someone could write another book about what happened to the Jewish expressive culture. It was true for everything. It was true, first of all, for davening, for the music of prayer in the synagogue. I grew up in the Bronx. We had the richest sources of davening. Every street had a little shul where people sang in a different way. I talk a little bit about this in the second chapter. And it's gone, completely gone. A Jew, by the way, our Ashkenazi Jews were the dancing Jews, par excellence. We created a distinctive form of dance. And somehow after World War II, even the good dancers didn't think it was important that the young generation learn this because it's not American, it's not something, that could fit in with anything. And this, again, I should also mention that I grew up also with Sephardic Jews. It just so happens that I was the only Ashkenazi member of a Turkish Sephardi synagogue in my neighborhood, right? And which one of the reasons, from the Bronx to the Bosphorus, I was aware of Istanbul. Most of the community was coming from Istanbul. I heard Turkish since I was 10 years old, right? And it just so happened that the son of the rabbi went to my yeshiva as the only Sephardi boy, right? So I became the only Ashkenazi fellow in his father's shul. This was just a few blocks from us in the Bronx. So our part of the Bronx actually was like very rich and interesting in many ways. Okay, let's go to the next question, perhaps.
Well,
If we can.
there is such a thing as the next question.
I hope.
And it's also about something, well, it's about something that you lay great stress on in your book.
Yeah.
And this is a surprising role in the history of klezmer music, of Jewish music, that you ascribe to a very small slice of Europe. And you
Yeah.
say a large part of the klezmer music that was brought to America 140 years ago stems from the musical symbiosis of different ethnicities in Ottoman Moldova. Moldova is not a large place.
No.
And, seen from Hungary, well. So the ethnicities, Jews, Gypsies / Roma, Turks, Tatars, Greeks. And you describe...
And Moldavians, don't forget, please, the majority.
Well, to some degree, it must be Armenians too, I can tell you.
They were less, much less.
Much
but
less,
Anyway, the
but-
Moldavians were the largest group, of course.
Okay, it's
Romanian
just that
speakers. Yeah.
I'll tell you later why Armenia is in Bessarabia is important for me. So you describe how this minestrone of ethnicities came about. Now, in the 18th century, the Ottoman government appointed Greeks as provincial governors, who then, in order to promote commerce, promoted the immigration of Greeks and Jews, both Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews, into Moldova. And then, of course, this population mix continued after the Russian annexation in 1812. And then you say, which struck me as a bit of a jump, in time, that vestiges, I quote, this powerful musical fusion still survived in New York in the 1960s, which is going to take us to your personal experience, among older Greek and Armenian musicians. And there are some nice examples for this. Like an oud player says to you, the Greeks, the Turks, the Armenians, the Sephardim all listen to each other's music. Although he adds the Persians only listen to Persian music. Your friend Pyrrhus, a Greek Albanian, right?
Well, it's a mixture of...
tells you that many Greek clarinet players in New York listen to Jewish dance music, and some of them even model their performance style after Jewish clarinetists, in particular the great Dave Taras.
Can I answer this? Okay, can I answer the question?
No question has been asked, but that's fine because you know where this leads.
Yeah. Look, the first fact, this is the second question about klezmer music. The klezmer profession is much older than the Jewish Bessarabia, Jewish Moldova, begins in the 16th century in Renaissance Prague, and it spreads with the same word. Klezmer never meant that before, but in the 16th century it meant a member of the Jewish Musicians Guild. A member of this guild had the right to play at a Jewish wedding. Nobody else could ever play at a Jewish wedding unless asked to by a klezmer. Now, this profession, remember, in most Christian countries, Jews could not have guilds. They could not enter the Christian guilds. They could do no skilled work whatsoever. So in Prague, Jews were allowed to do a great variety of things that they were never allowed to do in most of Europe, most of Christian Europe. Among them, have a musicians' guild. Now, this custom spread all over Jewish Eastern Europe, in Poland, Lithuania, all the way to Lithuania. Within 50 years or 100 years max, you had the klezmer profession. So that's the basic reality. And this is basically one musical style, one repertoire from Czechia all the way to Lithuania. And the same genres, et cetera, as far as we know. What happens, and this is, again, we don't need Bessarabia or the Moldavians for this. This was something that the Jews did on our own. But in this unique moment when, after 1711, which is the crucial year, when Tsar Peter the Great tried to invade Moldova and failed, almost got himself captured by the Turks, the Turks decided to dispense with the native princes. They brought in Greeks that they could trust from Istanbul. And at that point, you had our Musicians Guild, the Klezmer Guild, came into Moldova. And at that point, the other factor to remember, which is often suppressed, is that the Gypsies were slaves. The Moldavians and Wallachians, that's to say now Romanians, enslaved the Gypsies for 400 years. It's the only place in Europe where the Gypsies were slaves. They were slaves until the middle of the 19th century. Now, as we well know, the Gypsies are also, some of them, great musicians. As a Gypsy slave, the best job you could possibly get was to be a musician. As a musician, you could travel, you paid money to your master, you come back. And very quickly, and I have a friend in Chisinau in Moldova, Vasily Kiselica, who's researching this very carefully for decades, that only in Moldova, the Gypsies immediately tried to team up with the Jews. They learned Yiddish. They became part of the Klezmer Guild, basically. Not exactly, because they weren't Jews and they weren't Klezmer, but the two things merged. Only there, nowhere else in Europe, only in Moldova, these two professions merged. And maybe we can have a picture of Jedinets. Should be the first visual. There we are. Now, that's me in my father's shtetl in northern Bessarabia, northern Moldova, Jedinets. It turns out that Jedinets is one of the main centers of music in that country. My father would tell me this, but I thought he was just boasting about his native town. Actually, it was true. And for several seasons, I did field work in that shtetl, in that town, and which you can see is beautiful. And I came across older Gypsy musicians who described themselves as klezmer. They were not Jews. All the Jewish musicians had been killed or were gone, but the Gypsy, and they would call themselves Gypsy, never Roma. They don't want to be called Roma. They're Tsigan. They're Gypsies, meaning they're a mixture of ethnicities. Many of them have Jewish relatives in Israel. They're part Greek, they're part Roma, they're part Ukrainian. And when in 2008, the first time I met our band leader, Vanya Popov, who was the Gypsy band leader in the town of Jedinets, he said to me in Romanian, Noi klezmer. We are klezmorim. Noi klezmer. So for the Gypsies, that was a step up. And over 200 years, the Gypsy musicians and the klezmer Jewish musicians worked together, and they created a new repertoire. You had a repertoire, which I call a transitional repertoire, Moldavian, Romanian genres in the Jewish taste, composed by Jewish klezmorim. And Vasily Kiselica, my colleague in Chisinau, has been studying the opposite phenomenon, Jewish genres to the Moldavian taste, played at Christian weddings by Gypsies. So only there you had these two things going. Now, obviously, we didn't bring the Moldavian Christian repertoire to New York, but rather we brought the Jewish musicians brought the Yiddishized Moldavian repertoire to New York. And my teacher, Dave Taras, was the great exponent. Because guess what? When he fled the Russian Civil War in Ukraine, he and his wife Shifra went to our shtetl, Jedinets. And he learned from our musicians. And he brought that repertoire to America. And he was the most creative producer of that repertoire. And again, my first teachers, in fact, long before I met Taras, were Greek musicians. Like Nikita Chobanidis, who I describe, a great violinist. He had played with Naftali Brandwein, who was one of the greatest klezmer musicians. And they played, as Nikita told me, at Romanian Jewish weddings. This connection between Romania and the Greeks and the Jews, was something that was, I say, a given, didn't have to be explained. So maybe I can play, okay. Let's play one of Dave, we'll talk about who Dave Taras was, right? He was the most famous klezmer in America for many, many years. And when he came to Yedinets, he wrote music very fast, and he had an encyclopedic mind. He remembered what he'd learned. And he came to New York, and this is his recording of a dance called honga. The Romanians call it hangu. And when I went to Yedinets in 2008, I recorded our Gypsies playing the original of this tune. This is how Taras recorded it in New York in the 40s. So this is his honga frelax. You get the idea. Now, this tune is very famous in northern Bessarabia, Moldova, and my friend Diana Bunia, who is a great scholar in Chisinau, she made me a tape with versions of the same tune in all the different towns, showing which are more Jewish, which are less Jewish, right? So Yedinets is the Jewish capital for this tune. The other tunes are more like Moldavian Christians would dance them. It's much faster. This dance, hangu, when the Moldovans dance it, it's lightning speed. We Jews dance it at this tempo maximum. I taught this in Weimar and with a Moldavian teacher and with my friend Michael Alpert, and the Moldavian fellow said to us, gee, it's beautiful, but to us it looks batrineaska. Batrin means an old man, a veteran. And it's considered a dance for young people. But the way the Jews do it at this tempo, it's batrineaska, it's older people. So again, it's centuries of mutual influence. But if you, and I've interviewed older Gypsy musicians, you have to know who you're playing for. One violinist told me, this tune, if I play this for Moldavians, of course I play it in a very different style. If I play this for Jews, it has to sound something more like this. And this was a given that you would know as a practicing musician in that country when there were still Jews, having weddings. Okay, we have a minute.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll kind of skip ahead because we really don't have a whole lot of time. No. Let me just say, if you want to find out how a high school kid from the Bronx got to be welcomed at the Armenian and Greek nightclubs on Lower 8th Avenue in the 60s, then use the Kiowa period and ask him. Scholarship. Since we don't have a whole lot of time, I mentioned that when you produced Chevrisa, half the material on that record had never been recorded before, not in the 20s in New York, not anywhere. So, your brief description there suggests that you put in a fair amount of time of, library work.
Here.
Okay. Yeah. Both reading scholarly articles and studying transcriptions. Mm-hmm. And that you had to understand Jewish intonatia, without which the transcriptions would remain dead letter, mm-hmm. and that you had a chance to consult some living authorities to construct performance style, authentic performance style. So a few words both about the library work mm-hmm. and a few words about Jewish intonatia and performance style.
Sure. Well, again, This was happening, remember, when my friend Andy Statman and I were studying with Dave Taras. Now, we've heard a few notes of Dave Taras's music. Maybe let's have a picture of Dave Taras, perhaps. We have Dave Taras in the studio. There we are. And that's Dave Taras, and that's the accordionist is Sam Beckerman. I was studying with both Beckerman and Taras, right? Both as Taras was a great dancer, as well as a great, great klezmer. And I grew up with Davonin. The first music I heard, of course, was the shul, was Davonin, where everybody was doing something. And if you're in a shul as a child, you learn the Jewish intonatia. There's no way you can not learn it, because everybody is doing it, and it's surrounding your ears. That was the music I grew up with. My father was a very good dancer, so I had a sense of how a Jew stands, how a Jew moves his arms, how a Jew moves his shoulders, right? This is for part of being a Jew, being a Yiddish guy. Now, Taras was, of course, a great musician, so I would bring things to him, and also to Beckerman, notations. How would you sing it? What's the tempo? You know? I mean, I had a lot of the feeling myself, but I wanted to work on with them. The material itself, some of it came from, in the Slavonic division at New York Public, across the street, in other words, I discovered, and I'm not sure how I discovered it, but I discovered very late Tsarist and early Soviet articles in Russian, and I read Russian, and transcriptions of klezmer music. And remember, the first scientific work on klezmer music was done in the Russian-speaking environment, from Petersburg to Kiev in Ukraine. And the great scholar of klezmer music was Moshe Beregovsky, a great Jewish musician, ethnomusicologist from Kiev. And I was reading his works both in Yiddish, the first Yiddish Instrumentale Volksmusik, published in 1937, which I read in Yiddish, which inspired me, and then through Mark Slobin's publications of his writings then in English translation from 1982, I think, later. By the way, the term, I coined the term klezmer music in English. It's coming from Beregovsky. Beregovsky used the term klezmerische Musik and klezmerische Volksmusik to describe. He wrote his dissertation about klezmer music in Moscow in 1944, the first. And when I produced the concert, Dave Taras' Jewish klezmer music in 1978, I needed this title. I had to find a title. So I decided, klezmer, folk music, klezmer, how about klezmer music? Right? So that was on the keyboard, klezmer, you know, the marquee. And since then, that term spread like wildfire. We never expected. In the 70s, when I was starting to study with Taras, I mentioned to people that I was learning klezmer music. Nobody knew what I was talking about. I guarantee you. Even people who spoke Yiddish. Because this was a scientific term, klezmer music. And also, by then, I'd been in Romania several times working with the scholars in Bucharest. In the Romanian language, the scholars created this distinction between the music of the people and the music of professional musicians. So there's musica populara, is what the peasants and shepherds play and sing. Musica populara. What professional musicians play is called musica lautariasca. A lautar is a professional musician. Musica lautariasca. So Beregovsky was creating the same kind of thing, creating klezmerische Musik, the music of the professional, the klezmer. Because it was not just folk music, it was something of a guild of hereditary musicians. So this was useful to describe. And again, fortunately, in two American cities, namely New York and Philadelphia, several descendants of important klezmer families immigrated. So there was a possibility of learning. And I mean, I studied with Taras, and Andy studied with Taras. The next group of musicians studied with the American-born generations of klezmer families. Because if you're not from a klezmer family, you didn't have access. It was still a kind of guild. So maybe we'll play a minute from Alanenim. This is an example of a piece that I learned from an early Soviet transcription. It's a well-known Jewish song, but I'm playing it now on the cymbal, 1979, I think. And I worked on it also with Beckerman and with some influence of Antronik Rustamian, the Armenian teacher. This is how I'm playing this wedding tune, Alanenim. Okay. So again, this is intonatia. This is something that you have to learn orally. It's not from how it's written. It's one way that you could perform it.
Well, I think we should go to the dance.
Well,
Talk about Jewish dance.
okay, first thing to say, the Ashkenazim are the dancing Jews. No other Jews, except to some extent the Yemeni Jews, have a tradition of a distinctive dance. I grew up with Sephardim. The Sephardim absolutely do not have their own dance. They dance whatever the Turks or the Greeks or the Bulgarians are dancing. They do not have an idea of Jewish dance. It's not a Jewish thing. For us, dancing was a Jewish thing. And there was a clear distinction about what kind of movement is Jewish, what kind of repertoire is Jewish, and what isn't. There were things that you did, that the Gentiles did in some situations, polkas, mazurkas, whatever, but Jewish dance was something else. And I was always moved when I was a child watching my family dancing the Scher, which Scher is the 18th century German term for a contra dance. Scher. Later on they call it Kreuzertanz and other things, but I learned from German experts that Scher was the 18th century term. The old Scher melodies have a mixture of synagogal, Nusach style and Baroque styles, because we learned it in the Baroque period. And it came to all the Jews in Eastern Europe, everywhere, from Bessarabia to the Baltic, Scher. And it was a German contra dance, but we Yiddishized the style. And I was always very moved watching my mother and my father and the other relatives and the friends dancing Scher together. So this was typical of what Jewish dance was, this mixture of East and West for hundreds of years. And in some cases, the Gentiles learned the Scher from the Jews. There's especially the Moldavian Shire is a version of the Jewish Scher. Some places in Ukraine, they dance Scher, imitating the Jews. And then the other level that's important is that in Yiddish dance, in Jewish dance in Eastern Europe, there were two levels. There's the level of the community and the level of the tenser. The tenser was the expert dancer. My father was not an expert dancer. He was a good dancer. Dave Taras was an expert dancer, which means that he could improvise, that he could, in fact, Taras would sometimes show me, if he felt I didn't understand the inner meaning of a melody, he would start to move his shoulders, move his hands, to show this is what the tune means. And when you dance as a tenser, that's what you do, either as a soloist yourself or with several other people. We don't have couples, but just you form relationships, you make eye contact with either with a woman, with a man, and it's a great art, to make contact. And I know people who are frustrated because they would look at someone and the person didn't pay attention. You've got to look. You have to always, see what the other dancer is doing. Oh, and then shift to yet a third or a fourth dancer. And of course, the Hasidim naturally developed this. This is the basis of Hasidic dance. It wasn't like they invented it. They simply took this concept of Ashkenazi dance and made it even more so, more spiritual, more introverted. So this is in a nutshell, this is what Jewish dance is about. And to their credit, the Hasidim preserved this and developed it. Whereas our Misnagid Jews, the majority Jews, there was just too much desire to assimilate, and it was too weird. It was too Oriental, how the Jews danced, And so it was not considered something like my generation to learn this. It was not so important, and you'd have to drag it out to get it. I was able to do it. I teach as a tenser, finally, but I had to find several sources. There's almost no visual sources, almost zilch. To my chagrin, I discovered almost nothing was ever filmed. Very, very little. So I had to work with Taras, first of all, my father a little bit, and a few other very good dancers. We had Felix Fiebig here in New York, who was a great dancer, but he had become a modern dancer. So he just absorbed some elements. But I was able to drag out some of the sources from Felix because I knew him a bit. And there was also the influence of Yiddish dance on modern dance. It's another unexplored topic. Because Martha Graham, for example, had contact with very good Yiddish solo dancing. That seems to have been an influence on her. So another subject, but I'll just leave it at that.
Well, we have maybe 3 minutes
3
left.
minutes before the questions, I hope.
So,
yeah.
do you want to say something? Care to say something about further about the great teachers you've
Oh,
had?
yes, let's have a picture of Antronik Arustamian, please. Before we get to Antronik, just understand. We'll have to skip that. Sorry, we can't get into that. No, skip that. There's Taras, yes. There's Antronik Arustamian in the 80s. Now, I met Antronik was an Iranian Armenian from Russia who had studied in the in the Kharkov Conservatory in Ukraine, and a great virtuoso. He played for Stalin in his time. During the Second War, he fled to Iran, and he played for the Shah of Iran. And then in the 70s, mysteriously, he came to New York. And I could never figure out why. He was doing very well. He was playing at the Mosheyev Ballet in Russia. He was in Baku and in Yerevan. He had a very high position. Somehow he left the Soviet Union, came to America, and somehow, through various grapevines, they decided that I should be his accompanist. One of our first gigs was playing for the sister of the Shah of Iran at the Iranian embassy in Washington, which was, I always say in the book, I have a chapter about this. This was the world capital of paranoia. Nobody looked at anybody, let alone talk to anybody. But Antronik was a great, great musician. And among his other, he grew up with Armenian music, with Azerbaijan music, a bit of Krim Tatar music. And since he was from Ukraine, studied in Ukraine, he learned from the greatest klezmorim in Kiev. And at some point, he began showing me these klezmer tunes that he'd learned, before I even knew exactly what this was. But he was comparing klezmer tunes with Crimean Tatar melodies and showing me how similar they were. So there was a lot to learn from this man. And I'm grateful that I was his accompanist for a number of years at various situations before I had to withdraw and write my PhD thesis. But he was, absolutely amazing. And then, of course, I was studying with him at the same time I was just beginning to know Dave Taras. So I was beginning to put two and two together, put it this way. And Taras, of course, had a much more successful career. He was the favorite klezmer for a period of like 50 years or 60 years, a very long career, from 20 until 79 or something. So there's a lot to be said about Dave Taras, but I don't think I can say everything. But let's say the combination, let's say, of knowing a man like Antronik Arustamian and then working with the genius Andy Statman. And by the way, Andy Statman also studied with Arustamian. And then working with Dave Taras, somehow we felt that we had to put two and two together and do something, and that's how basically the klezmer revival happened. My friend Ethel Rame, who had then the Center for Traditional Music and Dance, she heard that I was working with Taras, and she sat me down in a nice Jewish vegetarian restaurant on 72nd Street and said, look, let's write a proposal to the National Endowment for the Arts. We should do something with this. So together we wrote down the basic outline, and it was accepted, and we had a year in which to study with Taras and then to put him on stage. And Taras had not been on stage for many years. He was considered to be in retirement. And again, for me, he was a household name. Again, my parents knew him a little bit. I heard him on the radio. He was issued, by the way, he was issued on LP by a Greek label run by Tetos Dimitriadis, who was from Istanbul. Because Dimitriadis knew that there was a Greek market for Taras's music. And then when I was an undergrad, I was playing in a Greek band, which I learned through the Greek Club of City College. And they gave me also these reissues of Taras's music for Greeks, written in Greek. And once we played in the Catskills at the Acropolis Hotel, which was a Greek hotel in the Catskills. And when I entered the room, half of the Greek audience stood up and pointed to me and said, Dave Taras. We love Dave Taras. Unforgettable. So, I think
probably it's your turn.
Your turn. Please.
I
Mhm.
Greek klezmer musicians?
There are no Greek klezmer musicians.
Okay.
Angus doesn't play, he plays Sephardic and
So
Sure,
when-
I know.
When I worked with
Yeah.
them, you know,
Yeah.
it would always be like wedding music, high energy.
Sure.
But that was going back quite a few years. But recently, I've seen, especially Avram, or maybe I got his classification wrong. But the point I'm trying to make is that I would see him. The music that I would work with him in was very high energy. But lately, he would be demonstrating things that were considerably more plaintive, even if it was only one or two songs. What I'm asking you is, do you think that your scholarship has influenced him in particular? And I consider him maybe, you know, not in the middle of the community, but maybe even on the periphery. But do you think that your scholarship has moved the importance of that plaintive music more into the klezmer mainstream in America, in New York?
Well, this is a complicated question. So, if we're talking about, again, because I believe that Avram Pengas would never claim to be playing klezmer music. So,
he plays more Mediterranean and
Well,
Israeli.
okay, that
Exactly,
could be
that's
my
enough.
mistake,
Yeah.
but I associated him with that. But he did make this marked distinction in his performances.
oh,
So, at
Well-
least to my observation, so
yeah.
do you think that, again, you know, your scholarship, you're bringing out the importance and even the notice
Yeah.
of that part of the
Well,
music?
frankly, in all due respect, I can't claim something like that. And in Greek culture, as I said, lament is called like moirologia. It's extremely important. And in the book, I have a section where I'm playing moirologia on a recording from my father, he really loved it. But again, this lament is deeply important for Greeks, very, very important. So as far as Sephardim, it's a different thing because for them, they don't have their own instrumental music. They have songs, which are sung usually by women. You know, I understand some Ladino, I know something of that repertoire, but it's not a comparable. They would hire non-Jewish musicians to play at their weddings. So it's, again, and the women's repertoire was more of a private repertoire, although some men also learned the women's songs. But women there were allowed to sing at the wedding. They could be heard. The important thing to remember with Ashkenaz culture, women's voices could not be heard. And one of the reasons why our klezmorim were able to have a monopoly on the music for the wedding is because they're all male. They didn't sing. I mean, for a klezmer, it was almost an insult to be a singer. They were instrumentalists. They didn't accompany singers. The only person who sang was the batchen, who was a kind of poet, a folk poet, you know, and a jokester, right, and an orator. He wasn't considered a singer. So that's, you know, again, a fundamental distinction. Maybe that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Any other question, perhaps?
I had a question. You mentioned at one point that you learned, in order to learn the music, it wasn't written, that you had to learn it orally?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Not all of it was, some things were written.
some of
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Have you, for what all you've talked about sounds fascinating. Is it on record or on video or on tape? Like, can it be seen and looked at currently or in the future? Have you saved it in one form or another?
I'm not sure what it is. What do you getting at?
The dancing and the music. Like,
But it's two different things.
Yes, so
Dancing,
both, yes.
I've been documented recently, like in the last 3-4 years, by my student Natalia Holava from Belarus, who's a very good dancer and a videographer. So really, thanks to her, we now have a significant group of videos of my teaching and also my students who are mostly in Germany. They're, for the most part, post-Soviet Jewish people, mostly women, who have the Jewish posture and movement in them, and it was very easy to teach them. Another distinction that, again, despite all the Soviet anti-Semitism, repression of Yiddish and Jewishness, many, many Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Moldavian Jews of every generation preserve very unconscious elements of Yiddishness in a way that most American Jews don't, actually. So in a sense, our American freedom accomplished this repression of Yiddishkeit much more effectively than Stalinism did. Well, I'm saying, if you look at the videos that Natalia put together of, again, my students are originally from Kharkov, from Moscow, you know, from Chisinau, and you just see how we're dancing, they get it. It wasn't hard to teach them. They didn't have it the first day I met them, but after, you know, one season of working, they understood. Right? I taught in Moscow once. I pity I don't know what I'll ever teach there again. But I could see the nucleus, you know, of what I could have worked with the Moscow. Although I don't know how many of them are still there, actually. The people who invited me are now in Israel, no, in Jerusalem. So anyway, that's as far as the dance. As I said, it was not well documented before. Very shockingly little documentation. As far as music, well, I don't know what to say. You know, there's a whole, say, generations of the post-revival musicians, both in America, in several other countries, in Israel, in Holland. Some of the best klezmer music now is coming out of the Netherlands. And when I was first in the Netherlands, no one knew what I was talking about, klezmer music. There was nothing there. And of course in Germany. I mean, a couple of the best Jewish clarinetists are actually Germans. So, but the klezmer revival now, it's more than 50 years that's been going on. But of course you can start by listening to my recording, first of all, with Andy Statman, which is called Zev Feldman and Andy Statman, Jewish klezmer music from 1979. And then Chavrisa, as András mentioned, from 1999, published in 2000 by Smithsonian Folkways, led by Stephen Greenman. And I should just say that's in the postscript of my book, the inspiration for that was knowing a man named Jeremiah Hescheles. Jeremiah Hescheles was a great Yiddish poet from Galicia who had been the klezmer band leader, violinist in his shtetl. When he came to America in 1938, he was very depressed and hearing American klezmer music, and he stopped playing. So when I came to him, he was 89 years old, and he agreed to teach me. He could sing beautifully, and he had an excellent memory. So the inspiration of playing for him and learning from him, we formed this ensemble, doing the old European repertoire. He lived to be 100, by the way.
I have 2 questions.
Please.
The first one is you show us that it's a sad music, and yet you say that it was music that was played at weddings.
It's not only a sad music.
No, but you
that's
did.
one part of life.
Okay.
Yeah.
But can we don't have, I don't have an idea when you refer to the dancing. What kind of dancing was it?
As I said, there's the two kinds. I mentioned Sher, which is the contra dance, which is very characteristic of East European Jews, where you have 4 couples getting together, and there are steps and so forth, but there are also shainen, that everybody has to do improvised movement in the center as part of it. Now, a tenser, an expert dancer, that's all he does. He does shainen, he does improvised movement. And that's Jewish dance. And that's what I prefer to do. Now, I do some figure dances. Oh, by the way, we also Yiddishize the Moldavian Romanian dances. So most of the foreign words in the Yiddish klezmer repertoire are from Romanian. Dances like Bulgarish, which is my father's favorite dance, from Bulgariaska. We just heard a honga that Dave Taras is playing, which is some changu, and sirba, and zhok, and so forth. Those are the Romanian dances which we Yiddishize. That's very popular also in America. But a tenser didn't need dances. A tenser just needed to move. He would just respond to the music and decide whether this is introverted, extroverted, how he felt that day, who was watching, who was dancing with him, who was playing, right? And he would adjust. Or she, by the way, a woman could also be a tenser. You know, first of all, among the women. Some women could be very respected as dance leaders and solo dancers. And also in misnagid, non-Hasidic weddings, and we have nice visual documentation, drawings and paintings of this, men and women were on the same floor together. there's some beautiful, beautiful drawings and paintings where you see men and women actually not touching, but dancing together, moving. That was Jewish dance. So I hope that answers. Yes, please. Okay, do you need a mic?
I wanted to know, is it okay if I move the topic to Turkey now?
Turkey, if you like. Yeah.
Sure. So a few years ago, I was there, and the Russian draft had just begun. So they were escaping Russia. Many of them came through Istanbul before they went elsewhere.
Right.
And so we had Dimitri Dibranoj and others. I was at a Yom Kippur service, and they were playing there. And that was that, like, they had just arrived in Istanbul, and then just the greatest musicians, klezmer musicians in Russia were there. And
Some of them are there, yeah.
yeah. And there was a moment of just like sort of an explosion, and that was the Jewish music in Istanbul at the time.
Well, do you know Aleftina Parland?
Yeah, she's his close friend.
Oh, she is. Well, of
Yeah.
course.
So I wanted to ask you, can you explain more about that kind of movement? And I know because you're working with Aleftina that you are influencing her work there too.
Well, I hope so. No, she just wrote to me today. We're in contact. This is, by the way, a boyarina, a Russian aristocrat family who grew up in Helsinki in Finland, who then learned Yiddish and plays trumpet and sings in Yiddish and started the Istanbul Klezmer Kapelya. So go figure. And playing there are mostly European expats in the band. There's an Alevi Turkish drummer. But I'm not, this is all very interesting, but I'm not sure what your question is exactly.
I just wanted to know if you knew more about it.
If I knew what?
If you knew more about it from Aleftina, from
This is current events. This is people fleeing the Russian Ukraine. You know, this is. But what's important? Okay, last chapter in my Klezmer book, that there was a transnational genre that originated in Moldova and went to Istanbul for several hundred years, which was because the Turks, when they incorporated Moldova in the 16th century, they insisted the Moldovans send cattle to Istanbul because the grass is greener. People thought beef, that's where they eat the grass in Romania and Moldova, tastes better than the grass near to Istanbul. So for 400 years, we had the Moldavian cowboys driving their herds of cattle to Istanbul, and they, of course, would be in touch with the Butchers Guild in Istanbul. And gradually, there'd be musical genre that developed between the Klezmer and Gypsy musicians going from Moldova to Istanbul, the Greek and Turkish Gypsies in Istanbul, trying to play something that would please both the Wallachian cowboys and the native butchers. And you ended up with a genre called kasap, which means the butcher's dance, kasapavase, which the Greeks pronounce kasapiko, which is also, the Turks in Istanbul call it hora, which is the Romanian word for dance in general. The Greeks sometimes call it sirba, hence serviko. And my thesis is that this Turkish version of this dance, which we call Bulgar, Bulgariaska, Bulgarish, it's all the same dance as Hasapiko. This came to Lebanon, Syria, as hora. They pronounce it haura, right? This is the origin of the Israeli hora. So it's a big, it's a big circle, and again, the tunes and the musicians were going back and forth from Istanbul to Moldova, from Moldova to Istanbul, stopping here and there, possibly into Kastoria in Macedonia, which was the center of the Furriers Guild, which is all part of this movement. So that is also one of the reasons why these Greek musicians that I knew when I was young were hip to this repertoire, do many kinds of this klezmer repertoire. And so now with Aleftina and the newest group of emigres from Russia, the story continues.
Thank you.
Right? But in Turkey, they know something about what this is. In fact, 45 years ago, I went with Cüneyt Kosal, one of the great kanun players in Istanbul. I was expressing interest in a related genre called longa, which developed in the late 19th century. It's newer than kasap and hora, but it's the same principle. So he took me to the radio station archive, and I still have, I photocopied from him, more than a dozen, maybe 20 or 25 tunes of longa from Istanbul. And he said to me, remember, the composers were Turkish, but this style comes from Iflak, from Wallachia. In other words, it came from Wallachia, Moldova, Romania to Istanbul. So even in the 1980s, a musician like Junaid Bey understood that this was their version of some kind of Romanian, Jewish, klezmer, whatever it was that was going back and forth. And I even found on my own, by sheer serendipity, a description from 1839 written by an English woman who was in Istanbul. She wrote a book called Beauties of the Bosphorus. This was Julie Pardo, wrote Beauties of the Bosphorus, and she happened to witness a scene of what she calls the Wallachian and Jewish troubadours playing for the veiled beauties of Istanbul. Right, so we have our klezmer and our gypsy from Wallachia, from Moldova, playing for the Muslim women at a party. Go figure. This is almost 200 years ago.
How could you go wrong?
Well, I'm afraid
Okay.
this is all the time that we have for our event, but there's a treasure of information that is still contained in Dr. Feldman's book, which is available outside. And Dr. Feldman, would you be available for signing?
Absolutely. If you don't throw us out, I'll be there signing, sure.
Well, we
do
must
it.
begin now then.
Let's do it.